what we do for that. What? See, we're all set. That'll make life a little easier, right? are grateful, friends, for your being here today to offer comfort to our bereaved who have lost a wonderful and powerful presence in their lives. We will begin, Rabbi Zarin chanting and bringing forth to us words from our tradition.
Psalm 23. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, binod deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni, nafshi shoviv, yanachini v'magalei tzedek, lema'an shemo. Gam kirech begeitz al-mavet, lo yirara ki ata imadi, shivtecha Shantecha heima yenachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorai, dishanto Hashem en roshi, Kosir vaya, ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni, kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God guides me in straight paths for the divine name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Being a relative newcomer to this community, I did not have the privilege of knowing Irene Berman in the peak of her life, but I did have the great privilege of seeing her and knowing her at the end of her life. Our tradition teaches that there is no truer act of kindness than caring for those at the end of their lives, because it is the one act of kindness that is truly selfless and cannot be repaid. And in Irene's last days, she was surrounded with more kindness and love than many of us ever have the privilege of experiencing. We also know that in Judaism, memory is a sacred act, and her memories were already being preserved with such care and kindness in the cooking of her favorite recipes and dishes, in the preserving and sharing of pictures of her throughout her life. And with all that in mind, I wanted to share a poem written by Rabbi Harold Schulweis entitled When Dying is Over, words that I think are quite appropriate in Irene's memory and in honor of those who mourn her loss. When dying is over, a different kind of memory takes over. Not the memory that is obituary, not the memory that records the past indiscriminately, but the active memory that sifts through the ashes of the past to retrieve isolated moments and that gives heart to the future. That memory is an act of resurrection. It raises up from oblivious the glories of forgotten years. Even the memories of failure, the recollections of frustration and regret are precious. Broken memories are like the tablets Moses shattered, placed lovingly in the holy ark of remembrance. Memories are saved, those immortal, disembodied ghosts that endure. What is life after death? Pointers, ensigns marking places that raise us up to life and give us a changed heart. Perhaps a life lived differently, better, wiser, stronger than before. What is left after death? The life of those who continue to live on and treasure those memories, carrying them forward with them.
To our bereaved this day, to Carrie with Ron and Adrian, Roseanne with Daniel, to Emily, Marcus, Charlotte, Jacob, David, Amalia, to Anne, Levine-Shein, remembering at this time, as we do as well, Martin and life, Zichronam Livracha, blessed memory. And we invoke the presence in our hearts, of course, of a dear friend by the name of Ruth. To you we offer this prayer. Merciful God, strengthen those who mourn the loss of Irene Berman. Help them to look beyond this moment and help them to realize that death cannot destroy the bonds of your everlasting love. Sustain them with the knowledge of our faith that you will not abandon our souls to the grave. You will not allow your faithful to suffer oblivion. For you, O Lord, have taught us the way of life. Through you, our refuge, we gain eternity. And let us say, Amen. We are privileged this morning to be able to embrace the portrait and the entire gamut of Irene's life from those who, of course, knew her best and treasured her personally and very, very deeply. We're going to begin with words from Amalia, and Jacob is here. Okay, glad you made it, Jacob. You will follow, followed by Marcus, Emily, and Charlotte, and we'll continue thereafter.
Despite my grandmother's long 4 years of dementia, my memories of her are still really strong. Most of my time spent with Momor consisted of her introducing me to my love for drawing and arts and crafts, or making her iconic heart-shaped Norwegian waffles, which I proudly call Momor waffles. I loved spending the Jewish holidays at her house and was always fascinated by the beautiful tables she would set. I especially loved when she would let me spend hours decorating the place cards for each guest. My grandmother's Norwegian pride was deeply woven into my childhood, as every year in elementary school, my mother and I would run the Norway table on International Night, making all of Momor's most iconic recipes. I was always interested in the books my grandmother had written. I wasn't exactly the first person to raise my hand at Hebrew school when asked about the Torah, but whenever we were learning about World War II, I immediately raised my hand to share my grandmother's "We are going to pick potatoes" story. When I was in kindergarten, my mother and I took a trip with Momor to Disney World, and despite her European energy, she liked it a lot more than my mom did. I often think about what it would have been like to talk with my grandmother over these past few years, to have had her at my bat mitzvah or spend another Rosh Hashanah or Passover in her home. One moment that stands out in particular was in my 9th grade English class when we were reading Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, and I realized that Momor had actually translated that very play. It's been a long time since I've truly had my grandmother with me, but the wonderful memories I have of her will always stay close. While other kids had Grammies and Nanas, I had a Momor.
Forgive me, this is a little bit jumbled. I wasn't able to prepare anything, but what did Mormor mean to me? I guess when I was young, Norwegian waffles, drawing, playing at her house, fun Passovers with cartoonish masks representing the story of Passover. I guess as I got older, tales of her family from Norway. She introduced me to the books she wrote. Like Amalia mentioned, We Are Going to Pick Potatoes. There's too many memories to mention. I guess I'll do two. My last memory of her, a very Mormor-esque memory. I remember she was at my house making Norwegian waffles. I think many of us have many of those memories. And I guess my first memory of her would be my first memory ever, actually. I have a vague memory of receiving a Lego table as a gift for some birthday. I don't think I knew what the concept of a birthday was at this time, but I asked my mother a few years ago about if this was a real memory I had, if it was just a dream. And she told me it was for my 3rd birthday, receiving a Lego table, like a big table to hold Legos, from Mormor. And I played with that throughout my childhood. So in a way, Mormor was with me through my entire childhood. And I remember when I was 10 years old, she gave me a gift that was like a calendar made out of blocks. Like, you change it every day and it showed the dates. I remember I was like, really? Like, I wanted some toys or something, but because I was 10 years old. But now that I'm older, I use it and I change it every single day. So in that way, she will always be with me, and I'm grateful for her care throughout my life.
One of the most important things in the world to Mormor was being a grandmother. She immersed herself fully in every aspect of her life, and in the last 30 years of her life, being a Mormor became integral to her sense of self. And she made sure that everyone knew it. It was as if she were the only Jewish Norwegian grandmother in the greater Hartford area. And to be fair to her, she might have been. For instance, I'm sure many people here remember corresponding with her via email, mormorberman1@aol.com. Or have seen the t-shirts that our grandchildren all wore that read, "If mommy won't buy it for me, Mormor will." We're still not sure where she got those. Or there were the highly coveted Mormor coupons, which were reliably printed and tucked into cards on special occasions. They could be redeemed within the year. I actually don't think they ever expired, and entitled us to a day of shopping at West Farms Mall or a sleepover at their house at 27 High Hill Drive.
The three of us spent so much time at Mama and Grandpa growing up. We only lived 1 mile away from them, from West Hartford to Bloomfield. I could drive there with my eyes closed. Sometimes when I want to go to the house, I would call Grandpa, and he would say no. Another good time. 5 minutes later, I would call Mama. Instead, and she would say, "Of course, now is the perfect time. Mama always say yes. She never turned on a time spent with her grandchild.
Spending time at their place was like traveling back in time or entering a fairy tale. We drive past the 4-H farm on the left and the giant weeping willow at the base of their street. Then up the winding forested hill where their house was tucked away. We'd always count the number of bunnies or deer as we passed along the way and then exclaim to Mummer when we'd broken our record. She'd always be waiting for us at the front door. Her house was full of treasures and little discoveries yet to be made. Nothing was childproof or generic. Every fabric and texture was beautiful and vivid and particular, every object a portal to one of many lives Mummer had lived before she had become a grandmother. We'd arrive and our sleepover uniforms would be waiting for us. Handmade itchy wool sweaters, ancient-looking nightgowns that presumably our moms and aunts used to wear, and traditional reindeer hide slippers for our feet. If we weren't going to Ruby Tuesdays, Mummer would make us dinner and Grandpa would begrudgingly make a fire. The smell of fennel and dill and smoked fish filled the house. She'd feed us hearts of palms and artichokes and Jarlsberg cheese and styrofoam cups full of Earl Grey tea, though really it was just milk and sugar. Eventually, when we would ask to increase the tea-to-milk ratio, she would cheekily lament that we were growing up. For dessert, Norwegian treats, marzipan, daim, and Norwegian chocolate, or chocolate and yellow paper as we called it, which she always had stocked. On rare occasions, she'd offer us more typical desserts intended for typical American kids, such as chocolate ice cream, but that was only if our typical American grandfather hadn't already finished it.
Before bed, she would sing us lullabies in Norwegian, Swedish, French, and English. She'd tell us stories of the gnomes living in the mountains and the trolls living in the backyard, of little bears crossing the street to get to their house, and teeny tiny kitty cats hiding under the table. Her stories consisted of so many friendly imaginary creatures, so many layers of time around us at all times. More so than her folk creatures, though, she loved to tell stories from real life, about her life in Norway before the war, about her decades-long romance with Grandpa, about our mom and Roseanne and Adrian's childhoods. She especially loved to tell us the stories of our own births, how she and Grandpa raced to the hospital and never left our sides. She made sure we understood how monumentally the world changed for her with the arrival of her first 3 grandchildren. It was as if she was always reminding us how important we were to our family history still unfolding. In the morning, she'd welcome us to breakfast at the Berman Hotel. She'd have us write and illustrate the menu for Grandpa, who always took Mummer's antics in stride. Every time we'd make heart-shaped Norwegian waffles, as have been referenced already, with cloudberry jam. Inevitably, she'd have misplaced the batter recipe, the one she swore kept the family secret for the perfect waffle. And so each time we would experiment with a new one, declare it the best, and then lose it again by our next sleepover. If we were lucky, she would let us play with the giant dollhouse. It was filled with tchotchkes and little figurines, most of which she'd saved from when she was a little girl. Every object had a whole universe of meaning behind it. We were totally transported and learned to treat everything, from the little plastic trinkets and treasured heirlooms, to treasured heirlooms as the most precious of artifacts, as essential components in the family's archive. It's clear to us now that the specialness of each object came from her infectious way of making meaning out of life's details.
Spending time with her was never boring and always fun and chaotic. She was always doing 1 million things at once, running around the house while talking loudly on the phone in Norwegian. We were pretty calm and well-behaved kids, and we were totally enamored by her zest and scattered nature. She was constantly throwing elaborate Scandinavian-style dinners and then casting herself as the lead actress. She was so full of charisma and vitality, it only seemed natural to play this role. While some might have experienced this as self-absorbed, to her grandkids, she really did function as the center of gravity, and we loved being in her orbit. Through her strong connection to Norway and Judaism, she instilled in us such a strong sense of rootedness and identity, in our daily lives and in our place in history. And yet, somehow, the only Norwegian we picked up were 3 key phrases. I love you, Momor, thank you for the food, and don't scream. They've proved to be quite useful to this day.
Mama and I had the same sense of humor. We often giggle and laugh one time, and when I was a little, I took a bad picture of her when I was on vacation in the ticket. Mama wanted me to delete it. After all of the debate, I told her I would delete it if she paid me $10. And she said, and she did, and I didn't know if she were angry or impressed that a 10-year-old blackmailing her. This made me smile.
These childhood memories are deeply ingrained, but our relationship to Mormor deepened as we got older, especially as she dove back into her family history, came to identify with her survivorship, and completed the first of her 3 books on Norway and the Holocaust. We found ourselves enraptured by this profound memory work taking place inside our own family. She would visit our history classes at school and bring us along for book events around the country.
As the first grandson, I was named after her father, Marcus Levine. He was so important to her to name it, and to so many other Jews in Norway who had to escape from the Norwegian Nazis because of this moment. And I always have a special relationship. She let me having sometimes for us in her life named Marcus.
When I was in middle school and first getting into photography, Momor let me take her official author shot. We arranged a photo shoot on her back porch. Momor did her hair and makeup and put on a vibrant blue sweater. I positioned her, and with my point-and-shoot camera, took a photo that appears on the back of her first book. She thought it was the best picture of her ever taken, at least after I showed her how to Photoshop out her wrinkles, which she swore me to secrecy. I credit her for my first professional gig.
As a 6th grader, I was inspired by Momor to write my own version of the family stories I had heard so many times. I co-authored and illustrated an allegorical children's book about a family of persecuted ducks and their escape to the neutral pond across the forest. While this may sound extremely sophisticated, I'll admit it was a bit heavy-handed. Unsurprisingly, Momor loved the Duckingtons. It was simply the best, most fantastic thing she'd ever seen. The other day, I was flipping through my copy of the Duckingtons for the first time in years and found a thank you note she had written me back in 2011. It read, "Dear Charlotte, I just finished reading your book thoroughly. I am so very, very proud of you for putting together something that meaningful, sensitive, and understated. It is so understated and simple, the effect and the expression of how you understand the history of the Holocaust. Perhaps when you are older and have your own family, you will be able to understand all the sentiments of gratitude and pride that I cannot even verbalize right now. So for now, thank you very much for being part of this terrible chapter of world history and making it known. With all my love and recognition of how fortunate I am to be your grandmother." I made a joke to Emily earlier that if we didn't blow or dry our hair or put on blush for her funeral, Momor would be pissed that we didn't look our best. However, she wouldn't have wanted us to wear any eye makeup because she definitely wanted us to be crying a lot. I believe she knows how grateful we were to be her grandchildren in return. When I got older and left West Hartford, I continued to see Momor's influence wherever I went. When I was living in Jerusalem, for example, I met her Danish high school boyfriend, Bob Bachman. The whole weekend I was there, Bob wore a sweater that Momor had knitted for him 60 years earlier. He kept it in pristine condition. He showed me photos he had saved of her, and his wife joked to me that Momor was the one who got away. Before I left, he whispered into my ear, "I could have been your grandfather." Another time, when I was in college, she called me, insisting I come to Doncaster immediately. There was someone I simply had to meet. Naturally, I thought she was setting me up with a friend's grandson. I ended up having lunch with her hallmate William, a 90-year-old retired school teacher with a love of Yiddish. It wasn't quite the setup I was looking for, but the three of us gabbed over bagels, and he bequeathed me his entire collection of Yiddish books. This is just a sample of dozens of stories like this, of her connecting us with people around the world. Friends, families, strangers even. Her relationships, like her precious objects, were infused with a sentimentality that transcended time and space. I loved meeting people who know her, or knew her, because they always said the same thing, that she was totally remarkable, strong, loving, and charismatic, who always looked absolutely fabulous.
I spent a lot of time with my grandparents before Mama dementia. I learned so much from her to be a good person, to drink tea, to drink shrimp and lobsters. Even though I keep kosher. Don't tell Dad. Yeah, I talk to you a lot. She always made me smile.
The painful irony is not lost on us of watching the family's memory keeper, storyteller, author, translator, and matriarch lose her memory, language, speech, autonomy, and capacity to bring people together. Her years in memory care were long and difficult, and as she became more sick, she became more reliant. She began to lose, at least outwardly so, the faculties that were so integral to her sense of self. But even as she lost her English and then Norwegian and then language entirely, we derive so much delight from the way she remained so thoroughly herself. The tone of her voice, the cadence of her speech, her throaty laugh and expressive gestures. And then once she could no longer speak at all, there were her facial expressions, her touch, the softness of her skin. Even without stories and context, delicious home-cooked meals and holiday gatherings, simply being in her presence was so deeply familiar and comforting to us. Until the very end, she was someone in whom love and strength abounded. And through our mom's care of Momor, through the most challenging years of her dementia, we saw in our mom that same well of abounding love and strength extended to Momor in return. There's so much of Momor in our lives today, even if she's no longer here to appreciate or take credit for it. There's art and friendship and good food and wine, pride in our Norwegian Jewish heritage and in the resilience of our ancestors. To embrace all of this is both our choice and our inheritance. Long before we had the language for it, we were learning from her a sort of stewardship of memory. She had been preparing us to take over as protectors of what in life is most precious.
We can't think of anything Mummer would have wanted more than all of her most cherished people in one room talking about how much they love her.
We love you, Mama, so much.
And you'll be in our stories forever.
You're here.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm Roseanne's husband. I'm Irene and Martin's son-in-law. And just want to tell a real quick story about the first time I met Irene. I had been dating Roseanne. It was back in 2001. Had been dating her for a couple of months. And she invited me to Nantucket for a weekend. She was up there. I left work on a Friday, hit never-ending traffic, missed the last ferry to Nantucket, ended up sleeping in some bad hotel room that I could find in August in Cape Cod. Didn't sleep much, was pretty nervous going over and meeting the family for the first time. Didn't feel great going over there. Walked in, met Irene and Martin, and suddenly everything was easy. She made me feel so comfortable, just how she was. It was basically, I felt like family. Roseanne had to eventually agree to that, but felt like family right away. And yeah, that's just how she was. She was warm, dynamic, big personality, made everyone around here feel comfortable. And she's a great, as you've heard, a great grandmother to her 6 grandchildren, great mother-in-law. We used to joke that she was always we were always each other's allies. If someone was mad, we would always be on the other one's side. A great cook. You've heard about the waffles. She discovered early on that I loved carrot cake, and suddenly there was carrot cake every special celebration. She taught Roseanne how to do it, and that still carries on today. So, the gravlax and everything else. And, we miss her. We miss her personality. We miss the fun that she provided and the great company. And we'll always miss her.
And we'll invite Ron and Adrian and Carrie.
Thank you all so much for being here. Years ago, I used to dabble a little bit in the local storytelling community, and I told a story, created a story based on my relationship with Irene and our shared love of gefilte fish. And story I told was at Real Artways, for those of you who've been there, in their main gallery space, which is a room not probably smaller than this one. It's a very intimate space. I told Irene about it and Martin, and she arrived a half an hour late, made this enormous commotion, drew everybody's attention. The show had to stop until she sat down. It happened to be my turn, so I was sort of delayed telling the story. So she sat down finally, and afterwards she told me 3 things. She told me that she loved my story. She told me she couldn't hear it. And she told me that I should have said more about her. That was Irene. She could hold mutually exclusive thoughts simultaneously. In any event, here's the story. The kitchen is a jumble of colanders, cutting knives, and slotted spoons. There's 7 pounds of raw fish, pike, carp, and whitefish on the counter. I can't find a wooden mixing bowl anywhere. It's April 1995. I'm making gefilte fish for our Passover Seder tomorrow. And the thing is, I detest gefilte fish. I came up with this fish-brained idea to make my own gefilte fish at last year's Seder, my first Passover with my then new bride, Carrie. Carrie's mom, Irene, was hosting our holiday meal. My mother-in-law is elegant, charming, and has an endless supply of wonderful stories to tell. And tell. And tell. Irene grew up in Norway. Her Passover table has a distinct Scandinavian flavor, Royal Copenhagen china, fragrant yellow tulips, and silver Kiddush cups that belonged to her grandparents. After the 4 questions were asked, the afikomen hidden, and many cups of Baron Herzog Chardonnay drunk, it was time for dinner. Irene served the first course, and there, lying on my plate, was a flaccid, mucousy gray orb garnished with a mushy gray medallion, the dreaded gefilte fish, the 11th plague. The jarred kind, Manischewitz, mass-produced, monosodium glutamate preserved and packaged, more like entombed, in a fishy, gelatinous goo. It smells bad, tastes even worse. I plugged my nose and swallowed without chewing. It was awful. But why should this Passover be different than any other night? Irene was a generous hostess, maybe a little too generous. Would you like another piece of gefilte fish, she asked, offering me a second helping before I could even finish the first. No, thanks, I'm saving room for the chicken soup, I told her. But it wasn't really a question. Over my protest, she deposited another nasty pescatarian slab on my plate, which irked me because I'd already reached my annual allotment. Why do we even eat these, I muttered aloud, a little more wickedly than I'd intended. I mean, it's not like the Israelites were feasting on gefilte fish in the wilderness. My mini Manischewitz mutiny stopped Irene dead in her tracks and seemed to put a bad taste in her mouth. Now I've done it. I've offended my mother-in-law over a lump of processed fish. Realizing how ungrateful I sounded, I attempted to redeem myself with Irene. We should make our own gefilte fish next year, I said, and waited nervously for her response. No one's asked me to make gefilte fish since I was a little girl, she said, in almost a whisper. I'd love to make fish with you, Ron. And there were tears welling in her eyes. So here we are a year later in Irene's kitchen. Irene appoints me gefilte fish maker in chief, and designates herself as my sous chef. Each of us is a near stranger to our roles. I don't have much experience with Jewish cooking, unless ordering Kung Pao chicken on Christmas Day counts for something. And Irene, she's not someone to give up control of her kitchen very easily. Cut the fish this way, she orders. That's too much sugar, not enough salt, lest I forget who's really in charge. Irene and I set about our tasks, filling a 16-quart pot of water, placing the fish heads and bones inside the pot, adding onions and carrots and salt and bringing it all to a boil. We chop the parsley and the turnips and the carrots and the Cuisinart. So far, so good, but we're not out of the desert yet. As we're mincing the pike and the carp, the Cuisinart gets stuck. We can't separate the base from the bowl, and for a time, the food master refuses to let the fish go. Somehow we manage to free the fish from bondage, only to realize that Irene has forgotten to buy matzo meal. There's an open box in her cupboard, but the sell date is years before Carrie and I were even married. The outdated matzo meal tastes like shredded cardboard. But does the matzo meal ever really go stale? We cross our fingers and decide to use it anyway. We add the matzo meal to the ground fish and vegetables, mold the mixture into 3-inch long oval patties, and place them into the simmering fish stock. We watch the patties as they sink to the bottom of the pot and disappear. Now all we can do is wait and pray. Please let the gefilte fish be good to eat. At least let them be digestible. As we wait, we're engulfed in the mesmerizing aroma of parsley, pike, and parsnips, and our minds begin to wander. For Irene, it's 1947, after the war. She's 9, and her grandmother, in her grandmother Besta's kitchen in Oslo. Her family has returned from Sweden, where they'd escaped when Irene was only 4 years old, just hours before the German SS rounded up the Norwegian Jews. Besta is old now and has difficulty walking, but there's no doubt who's in charge in her kitchen. She orders her daughter Rosa, Irene's mother, and Irene around like hired hands. I guess control issues must run in the family. They're making Shabbos balls, gefilte fish, and chrein, horseradish, for the Passover meal. There is no recipe, just a pinch of improvisation, a dash of resourcefulness, stretching the ingredients to feed their large family, the family Irene left behind when she came to America. For me, it's 1968. I'm 7. I've slept over at my grandparents' house last night. In my mind's eye, I wander sleepily into my grandmother Sadie, of blessed memory, her part American, part Eastern European kitchen. Grandma's wearing a white apron. She's already hard at work, preparing the Seder, setting the table with Maxwell House Haggadahs, and making matzo ball soup. We make the gefilte fish together. I can feel the coldness of the cast iron fish grinder, the fleshiness of the pike and the carp, the warmth of Grandma's hand against mine. It takes her hours to prepare the meal, but to my grandmother, time was love. Our Seder table is leavened with anticipation. Irene enters the dining room carrying the platter of homemade gefilte fish like they're stone tablets being handed down at Sinai. The patties are fluffy and pinkish gold. They look nothing like their bottled cousins. And now is the moment of truth. They're delicious, Martin says. So this is what gefilte fish is supposed to taste like? I think Roseanne said. You made these, Carrie asks. I take a bite. The fish tastes salty, sweet, and satisfying, like something long ago lost is being returned to me. In this moment, in this mouthful, I finally understand why we have gefilte fish on Passover. We hunger for memory, not just our ancestors' exodus from Egypt or of crossing the Red Sea, but of our own personal crossings. Gefilte fish is our culinary link to those memories. To Besta and Sadie and Rosa, and now Irene, all the loved ones who, though no longer sitting at our table, will always be present in our hearts. Eating gefilte fish is a sacred act of remembering, nurturing the present with the past.
My very first memories as a 3 or 4-year-old take place in Norway, sitting on my mother's lap on a train. The elevator in my grandparents' then uncle's apartment with its gate closure, and sleeping up at my uncle's cabin in the woods with a new doll I got to pick out. Being the youngest, I didn't have the opportunity my sisters had, spending summers in Norway with their uncle, my mother's brother, Leifari, a bachelor until he was about 40. So I was very excited when I was in 5th grade. My mother decided to pull me out of school for 2 weeks to accompany her to Norway. We stayed at my uncle's house, now married and with a daughter, my cousin Anna, who's 5 years younger than me. We got to Norway. There was, with every trip there was a fight over who would pick her up at the airport, her brother or an old boyfriend that she had remained close to. Upon every arrival in Oslo, we would go directly to my great aunt Maka's, right off a major downtown street, and we'd step into her apartment for an amazing breakfast of buns, homemade strawberry jam, and whipped cream. And this was something my mother had done before me. A visit to her sister, her Aunt Lotta's, her other beloved aunt, would take place later, where my mother had done, and then I, and my sisters, we would spend the night in her ginormous, luxurious cane sleigh bed with layers of quilts. It was just an amazing experience. And I have to mention that every trip to Norway, where I often shared a bed or a room with my mother slept soundly, free from the night terrors that often interrupted her sleep at home. Trips were spent at my uncle's house, filled with endless engagements of people to see, relatives and friends. And there was always this underlying tension between her and her brother because he was so jealous of time spent with other people. He wanted all the time to be with her. In any case, we would take a short train ride into the city. We'd run around downtown and, of course, shop, one of her favorite activities. So she could purchase knickknacks for the home, the table, whatever she could to enrich her practice of her innate practice of what you all know as hygge, way before it arrived to the United States. It seemed to me that candles were not available in the United States. But many people know how important it was to her to set a beautiful table, provide good food and company to welcome her guests in the most meaningful way. Another time, the entire family went to Norway for less than 4 days to celebrate my Aunt Maka's 80th birthday. I was a college senior, and I just took off. For that dinner party, my mother smuggled beef tenderloin in a cooler bag in her suitcase. I don't know if the quality, the price couldn't be found in Norway. There was a grand dinner party held in her cousin Harry Sam's apartment. His father, her Uncle Nolt, was there. Her cousin Ethelive and Ethelieve's son Martin were all there. It was an incredible occasion to celebrate her aunt, all the family that had come before, and it seemed like the dwindling family that we saw coming. There were so many other trips, and honestly, they blend together, but Irene was able to go to Norway with all her grandchildren multiple times, which brought her so much joy. Of course, to show them off to friends and family, but to share with them her childhood and her culture. One time, my boys and I went with her during the summer, and we took a trip up to Lillehammer, where her grandparents had a summer home that she vaguely remembered from her childhood. We went to an open-air museum, and I think the highlight for her was a recreation of an old-fashioned Norwegian classroom, and there was a teacher there who taught grammar, and she just beamed the entire time we were in there. I also remember that same trip, the 4 of us were squashed in a micro hotel room which had been hastily built for the Olympics. We were the three of us were up at midnight with the bright skies and jet lag, the boys bouncing off the walls while she slept purposefully. And I remember she had described the same exact phenomenon with her own toddler children. The last trip we made together was in May of 2019. It was purposely to be there for May 17th, Norwegian Independence Day. And it's not comparable to July 4th. It's a much bigger event where everyone is outside. The streets are surrounded with Norwegians in their national costume and parades and parties. It's just, without being there, I can't describe it. But her brother had somehow gotten tickets for us to sit right in front of the King's Palace. We walked down the center of the city. I was there with Emily and Charlotte. They were there too. We walked down the center of the city to the palace among throngs of people celebrating. We walked down the main street that goes right to the palace. She was so happy to be there. During the same trip, she was able to connect to a dear childhood friend, Vigdis. We also visited historians at the Resistance Museum in Norway, who she had worked with on all the endeavors that have been mentioned. No trip was without meeting some amazing people who she had forged a relationship with, a famous stage actress, an esteemed war historian, the U.S. ambassador to Norway, which during another trip my boys got to run around the garden in the embassy. Something happened to her eye during that trip related to a cataract operation, and the visual decline seemed to accompany the cognitive decline when we got back. This is only a tiny aspect of my mother's life, which was so rich in experience. I had so much difficulty deciding what to talk about today, but the trips kept coming back to me as I think they highlight how important her Norwegian heritage was to her, how important her family, immediate and extended, were to her, her close friends, her priority of forging new relationships and sustaining the old ones and celebrating all these elements together. She taught me so much on these trips that I am forever grateful for, and I will think of her in every moment that I am lucky enough to emulate her.
I'm not often at a loss for words. They usually come pretty easily and quickly. But finding the words to describe my mother, to tell her story, to do her justice, and to say goodbye requires a titanic effort, because my mother was a titan. I'm not going to write a hagiography. My mother was far from perfect. She was much too gifted and interesting to be perfect. Everyone knows the story. Her birth and early childhood in Oslo, her escape to Sweden and return to Norway with her family following the war. She created an incredible historical document of this time that's invaluable to her family and to the scholarship of the Second World War. She also wrote a novel and a book about her father, all after the age of 70. In retrospect, it's really no surprise that she became a writer in her later years. She was always a magnificent storyteller. When I was a little girl, the best stories were not about the major events of European history. She would tell stories about the most mundane activities and make them sound magical. A piggyback ride from an uncle was the best piggyback ride ever. Strawberry picking in the mountains of Norway was the most incredible way to spend a summer afternoon. She brought to life her array of eccentric, very eccentric aunts and uncles who were such a tremendous part of her childhood. She made them part of my childhood too, even the ones I never met. Some of the earliest stories I remember were from the year I started kindergarten. I was in the morning class of a half-day kindergarten, and I would come home every day at lunchtime. My older sister Carrie was still in school. My little sister Roseanne was napping. It was one of the rare times in my childhood that I had my mother to myself. She made me the same lunch every day for a year: tomato soup with a hard-boiled sliced egg on top. She told me that this was how Norwegian children ate their tomato soup. This is how she ate her tomato soup as a child. I asked for the same meal every day, and I ate my soup as she told me stories about her girlhood. Over the years, the stories became more grown up. There were stories about boyfriends, the story about moving to the US, first to Minneapolis, a city that was not well reviewed by the narrator. No offense. And then off to New York City, which fared better. She described all the players she and her roommate Susie met along the way, crafting a sort of mid-century Scandinavian Jewish Anna Karenina, populated by lawyers and accountants in Murray Hill, until she met my father. And then the stories took on a more Goodbye Columbus vibe. She loved to tell the story of my father, after a few months of intense dating, suggesting they take a break and not see each other for a while. She said okay, until a week later when he showed up drunk on her doorstep. She let him in, and they got engaged. He told her he wanted to keep the engagement a secret, and she shouldn't tell anyone. Did you listen to him, I asked her. Of course not, she laughed, and I roared with laughter too. She told so many fascinating stories about her early years with my father, about my grandparents' home and life in Brooklyn in the 1960s, in which she was a kind of cultural anthropologist, discovering previously unknown habits. My grandmother once asked her, "What color are your coats?" "My coats?" My mother responded, "I have one coat." This was in stark contrast to my aunt, who had several winter coats, which was unfathomable to a young woman who had come of age in post-war Europe. She had a keen eye for the details that bring a story to life. She would describe my grandmother in her Brooklyn kitchen with the orange leather banquette, wearing an apron, always wearing an apron, even though she didn't cook, because the apron pocket is where she kept her cigarettes. As I got older, she would share stories about her current life. She became a teacher of English as a second language to a community of Soviet refuseniks who had resettled in the Hartford area. She loved this work. I observed her teaching one time, and she would tell her stories to her students. In these stories, she captured their imaginations about becoming an American. They loved her, and she loved them right back. She even made a very close friend from among these students and created a whole new set of stories. English teaching led to Norwegian teaching, which led to becoming a partner in a language school. Where's Fran? And growing it into a very substantial translation company. Her clients were all the major Hartford area corporations like Otis Elevator, Pratt & Whitney, and Sikorsky Aircraft. She adored running this business and talked endlessly about her clients and the thrill of successfully signing large projects. As you can see, it was just a matter of time that she became a professional storyteller. I'm embarrassed to admit now that when my mother first published her memoir, I didn't read it for more than a year. I was afraid I wouldn't think it was good, and I didn't want to deal with the feelings that might conjure. So I procrastinated until finally one day I picked it up, and I couldn't put it down. I think those years of her book tour were some of the most gratifying for her. She traveled the country and told her story, and she was frankly mesmerizing. I'm so ferociously proud of what she accomplished in her life. It's the private moments, though, that I hold the closest. When I was about 8, the family was scheduled to go to the US Open with our swim and tennis club. I woke up that morning with a strep throat, one of many from that era. The rest of the family left for the tournament, and my mother and I stayed home. "Are you mad you can't go?" I asked. "Mad? I'm your mother. Why would I be mad?" And we both climbed into my parents' bed together and ate fudgicles and watched the Open on television. I told my mom I thought the tennis player John Alexander, that'll give you an idea how long ago this was handsome. And my mother turned to me, surprised I noticed, and said, "Oh my God, me too." For a few years, back in the 70s, we had this private thing about John Alexander. And then there was Poland. My temple was planning an organized trip to Poland and Germany, and I reached out to my mother and asked if she wanted to join me, and she immediately said yes. We walked through the grounds of Auschwitz together, holding hands, not speaking. There's a chapter in my mother's book where she tells the story of the SS Donau, the cargo ship that departed from Oslo in November 1942 with Norwegian Jews destined for Auschwitz. The Jews had been ordered to appear at the docks that day for processing. Apparently, the authorities read a list of all the names expected to appear that day. Was my name called? She wondered. My mother and her family had escaped the night before, warned by a friend and the police that they were to be arrested the next day. My mother and I stood together next to the mass graves at Auschwitz and said a prayer for every member of her family, our family, that perished. I'm so profoundly grateful that I had this experience with my mother. I don't know how to weave the story of my becoming a parent into this recollection of my mother, but it must be included. I had been considering pursuing parenthood as a single mother, but I hadn't mentioned it to my family, too anxious about judgment and negative responses. Then one day, there was a cover story in the New York Times magazine about women having children without partners. My mother saw it and she called me. "Have you ever thought about this?" she asked. "Don't you think it's weird?" I responded. "Weird? What's weird these days?" she said. And that unleashed one of the most meaningful conversations I ever had with her. Nobody was more excited for the birth of my daughter than her mama. "This child will be celebrated," she said. She insisted. She celebrated every moment and milestone with us that she could for as long as she could, telling her stories along the way. Somebody once said, "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller." And for a moment, my mother was the most powerful person in the world.
My mother's life during the past 5 years has not been easy for her, for my father, or for our family. She went to live in memory care in March of 2021, a year into the pandemic. My sisters and I, along with our father, had to make the decision for her, one that I hope nobody should ever have to make for a parent, especially during a pandemic. And at that time, we were just beginning to unpack the gravity of her situation. Her dementia wasn't as sudden as it appeared, and it probably commenced about 10 years ago, but she was really good at masking it. But there were signs. Like how in 2016, at our family's last Thanksgiving meal at my parents' house on High Hill Road before they moved to Doncaster, my mother asked me to make and bring over the entire Thanksgiving meal, which was strange for a woman who took great pride in her cooking talents, and she had used the same recipes for over 30 years. Now looking back, I realized that she had forgotten how to cook a turkey. Even though she was well taken care of and supported at her new home in the memory care wing at Doncaster, we all witnessed firsthand the effects of this progressive, horrible, and cruel disease that took away our strong, beautiful, vibrant, creative, articulate, charismatic, and loving mother. As painful as the disease was for my mother and those who loved her, I would like to talk briefly about some of the gifts that I received from her during this journey. So instead of a traditional description of my mother and her life, which you've brilliantly heard from everybody else, I'm going to describe how our relationship changed and actually grew stronger after her dementia took over. So I'm going to make it a little bit about me, but knowing my mother, she would approve. As many of you already know, my mother's love for her family was enormous and unconditional. It was the first priority in her life. Even when she couldn't say our names, recognize us when we visited her, and answer our questions, or even hear us due to her hearing, she knew who we were, and that she always knew when we visited that we belonged to her. Visiting her was excruciatingly painful at times, and I would often cry walking out of Doncaster. However, at times, I would be delightfully surprised by the joy that a visit could bring her, and the way her face would light up. The hugs, caresses, and loving words of her grandchildren brought her so much joy and comfort and pleasure. I've never been more proud of my children as they were when they visited her grandmother. As I see it, they were reciprocating all the love they had received from their Mormor during their lives. My mother would smile in delight when we stroked her beautiful gray hair, so meticulously braided every day by one of her caregivers. One day, her hair would resemble a young Norwegian girl from the 1940s. Another day, she'd have a regal bun like her Tante Maka. Or one day, she had the style of a young West Indian girl. Having her hair brushed and braided regularly soothed her brain and body and brought my mother relief. And at times, we had some good photo ops and giggles. Every time I visited her, I photographed my mother, documenting her physical changes during her dementia journey. Even up to the day she died, she was still my beautiful and beloved mother. As her disease progressed, my mother spoke only Norwegian and would utter only the name of my father with that Martin, which many of you know. She would say her parents, Mor and Fad, and her brother, Leif. After 60 years, I was finally able to use my functional Norwegian in conversation and use the phrases of my childhood that I learned from her. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Where's Papa? Do you need to go to the bathroom? My mother could be a stubborn woman, and she and I often clashed. She wanted to control me, and I often balked at her requests. I needed her to be more sensitive and empathetic, less intense, less physically demonstrative, and give me space. Everyone knows this about me, so why didn't the woman who raised me know this? She, on the other hand, needed me to be more attentive, spend more one-on-one time with her, and tell her my deep, dark thoughts. However, the greater her dementia began, our needs from each other began to change. She became sweeter, more vulnerable, and I could now be there for her on her terms. When I came to visit her, it would just be the two of us. I would chat, talk to her with my very basic Norwegian, ask her questions, and hold her hands, and even tickle her and kiss her, which she loved. And I didn't do that before her dementia. We finally had that one-on-one time. She finally had that one-on-one time with me that she so craved, and I could finally be the daughter she needed at the time. I feel very blessed that I had this special time with her over the past 4.5 years. On a lighter side, I was now in charge of selecting and shopping for my mother's new clothing as her needs change, and she couldn't wear her stylish designer clothes anymore. My mother would be horrified knowing that I now shop for her at Targets and even LL Bean, my father's personal favorite. You know, I'm not the fashionista of the family, so sometimes I just bought her the same shoes, simple tees, and leggings that I wear, and then we looked like twins. Whenever I visited her, the staff also commented on how much I looked like my mother and how we both had the same thick hair. If I stayed there a little longer, they probably would have braided my hair into matching hairstyles. I also received the gift of connecting and rediscovering my mother's family history, which only helps me to better understand her motivation in life and who she was as a human being. She was complicated. She had a unique childhood and had lost her parents before she was 30 years old. The puzzle pieces of her life were beginning to come together for me as I was now able to revisit the stories and experiences of her life and greater appreciate her wonderful, eccentric, and loving family, who finally began to make sense to me. My mother, as you have all heard, had spent the last 30 years researching her family's Holocaust experience through interviews, travel, writing, and speaking engagements. Although I supported this stage in her life, her emotionality and intensity could be overwhelming and all-consuming at times. So I had to place limits on her sharing of the process. I couldn't afford to get caught up in the obsession and drama. I needed to focus my energy on my present life, which had its own challenges. So participating and listening to her was at my convenience. However, as soon as my mother got sick and she could no longer talk to me and share, everything changed. The minute Roseanne and I packed her up and took her to memory care, telling her that she would be staying there just to get better and healthier, I finally had that moment of clarity, or call it a revelation. Our mother, as we knew her, was gone, and our relationship would never be the same. And then I finally yearned for the mother who was now gone, including all the conversations I had put on hold. I guess hindsight is 2020. I then absorbed her passion for researching the family history and all my mother's stories. And I was on a mission. I had lost my mother, but not her voice, which I could try to find in her memories, in her writings, and I would supplement it with my research. So I began mourning my mother by rereading everything she wrote. I tested my DNA and became one of those crazy Ancestry.com my heritage members. I traced her family back centuries and researched her family journeys from the many shtetls in Lithuania and Poland. I bought books on Lithuanian and Polish Jews. I read articles, and I discovered new cousins all over the world who we were related to. One, Wanda, is actually here, who I knew already. I connected with other children of Holocaust survivors, made new friends, and we started our own group to present our family stories together and honor our parents' legacies. And all this time, this just strengthened my love for my mother and created a new dimension to our relationship, one of which she would have been so proud of. I can become her voice. I also understand that my mother's research and overwhelming discussion about Norway was her way of expressing how much she loved her mother and father. She has been mourning her parents my entire life, and I will do the same.
I know all of us are utterly overwhelmed by the power and the closeness of expression that has come forward to us, allowing us this marvelous window of insight into a remarkable woman. We are grateful. We are grateful to you. Thank you. I'll offer just a few brief words because I also had the privilege of knowing Irene, albeit in a very different context. She, of course, embodied this journey, the history of the Jewish world, confronting and escaping the menace of Nazism and the Holocaust. And she did this world a remarkable favor by shedding light on that little-known experience of the tiny Jewish community in Norway through her early life there, her escape to Sweden, her return, and ultimately to the US. As her obituary read, this was a story in multiple acts over the period of time. In every respect, Irene was an unforgettable woman. She dressed beautifully, moved gracefully through life, a loving companion to Martin, unafraid to suggest very clearly what he should be doing in any given moment, and he sadly left us nearly 3 years ago. Her smile flashed brilliantly, and she always retained, as I recall, a bit of the Scandinavian accent of her earlier years. I learned much from Irene, all of us here did, from her presentations at the Bethel Men's Club and in other venues here, her enormous pride in her children and grandchildren, those who could do absolutely no wrong. And we did have a bit of a geographic connection, as we have heard. I grew up in Minneapolis and was very happy there. She was there less than a year and was not happy there at all. But at least we had a little laugh over the redundancy of the phrase Minnesota of Scandinavian background. In the Jewish calendar, we are living now in the world of Lech Lecha, the words from God to Abraham and Sarah. Go forth from your native land to an unknown place, and there you will become a blessing. And that is what she did with her family. She became that blessing. They left a place in which the culture and dress and foods were so familiar, to a land that she would have to leave behind ultimately if she was to survive and to thrive. That Norwegian aspect of her life always remained. At some point, we'll have to entertain the power and purpose of Norwegian waffles, which seems to be a phrase and a returning theme that we should all embrace. And she ultimately would come to a vastly different land, a place where she truly would come to believe she could make a difference, not only by dint of her writings and of the ways in which she engaged in translation, helping Soviet Jews, helping others in countless other ways. And she embraced no small number of other causes, imbued with the sense that in spite of the human tendency to oppress others, or perhaps because of that tendency, one ought to do everything in one's power to be the difference that ought to reign supreme. There We Picked Potatoes is the title of her first book, as I think we all know, but her legacy could also well be entitled There or Better Here, in this world, in this country, this community. She planted the seeds of hope, growth, and pride. She spoke her mind, but she shared her heart and love, and all who knew that love, all who met her, are far better for having that encounter. Yizichra Baruch, let her memory endure as a blessing. There's so much more to say, and that's why I hope we will have the privilege of doing so during Shiva later today, and also Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night after 6:30. At this time, friends, if everyone would rise for the El Malei Rachamim memorial prayer.
El Malei Rachamim Shochen B'Maromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina B'Ma'alot Kedoshim U'Te'arim Kezor HaRakia Mazirim Et Nishmat Bela Rivka Bat Mordechai Shelecha Le'olama Began Eden Tehei Menuchata Anna Ba'al Harachamim Hastireha B'Seiter Knafech Le'olamim Utzror B'Tzror HaChaim Et Nishmata Adonai Hu Nachalata V'Tanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkava V'Nomar Amen.
Master of mercy, remember all the righteous deeds Irene performed in the land of the living. The Lord is her portion. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Please be seated.
For those of you traveling with us in the funeral procession, I'd like to ask you all to please drive with your headlights on, your flashing warning lights on, and please drive with caution. The funeral procession must stop at stop signs and traffic lights. We'll be proceeding over Avon Mountain, turning left at the O'Neill then a left onto Jackson Street. For those of you using GPS, you could use 51 Jackson Street in Avon. If you have not had an opportunity to sign the register books, there will be a register book out at the front door. At this time, I'd like to ask those individuals honored as pallbearers to please rise